Good morning. Good morning. I'm Jane Harmon, Aspen trustee, recovering politician, dressed in red, white, and blue for the occasion, and I hope you all are too. To introduce this panel with the Harmon Eisner Artist in Residence, Ken Burns, and an unbelievably wonderful friend and storyteller in his own right, Fareed Zakaria. As Sidney Harmon would say, what a coincidence. This program, or this Harmon Eisner program, has the same name I do. If you knew Sidney, you knew he believed the arts are essential, not just to a rich and meaningful life, but to a healthy democracy. He often said there should be poets in every boardroom. Don't you all remember him saying this, Linda Resnick? Yes, you do. He championed the value of bringing creative thinkers together with scientists, policymakers, business leaders, and change makers. To him, and I strongly agree, this was an essential part of the Institute's founding story and purpose as a place for humanistic study. So, as we approach our nation's 250th anniversary, I hope you have all watched the American Revolution, and if you haven't, please go home and do that right after this panel. It's worth remembering how deeply art infuses that series, but also art infuses our story. Art helps us see ourselves. It creates narratives and images that can reach beyond our assumptions, our differences, and even our defenses. That is why artists matter, and it is why I'm so proud to continue Sidney's legacy and grateful for the leadership of Daniel Bosson, whose work has advanced this vision at Aspen. Congratulations to you, Danielle, and applause to you. Let me close with this. Artists are among our greatest futurists. At moments of profound change, when technology accelerates, institutions evolve, and society feels both more connected and more divided, the arts help us make sense of the world and imagine what might happen over the next 250 years. Their perspective is not a luxury, it is a necessity. So like you, I look forward to this conversation, and please join me in welcoming the brilliant man who gives me my take every Sunday morning, Fareed Zakaria, and someone, go ahead. And someone Sidney Harmon would have so wanted to meet, Ken Burns.
Thank you so much, Jane. That is definitely the sexiest red, white, and blue outfit I have seen. It looks like something out of Happy Days. And this audience is old enough to know what I'm talking about. So listen, we're going to have a wonderful conversation. The first half, we're going to talk a little bit substantively about the American Revolution. In the second half, I thought, since we have really the master storyteller on video, we're going to talk about how you tell history through images in a way that that Ken Burns does really, I think, better than anyone anywhere. So very soon it'll be the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, which is sort of the symbolic start of the American Revolution. And what I want to first ask you is it really a revolution? Is it really, as in your series you say, the most important event? Because, you know, I could make the argument, and I have in my last book, that it's not actually a social revolution in the way that, say, the Russian Revolution was, or the French Revolution. It was a war of independence. We kept in place the entire feudal structure. Slavery was kept in place. It was essentially a return to the rights of Englishmen that they had that were being abrogated by George III. Dominic Sandbrook and Tom Holland say on their podcast, you know, the rest is history. The French Revolution is much more important. Was it?
No. This is the most, as we say in the film, in the opening, the prologue of it, the most consequential revolution in history, because it's about ideas. And let me jump ahead just a little bit. I made a film 40 years ago on the history of the Statue of Liberty. It's fabricated by, designed and fabricated by a French sculptor, Bartholdi, in Paris, and it towers over on the Rue de Chazelle, the rooftops of Paris. And Victor Hugo, just a couple moments from his death, comes to visit it, and he looks at Bartholdi, he looks at the statue, he looks back at Bartholdi, and he says, "The idea, it is everything." And what we have in the American Revolution is the introduction into the blood system of the human race, this notion of liberty and freedom. It is true that we can parse it in a purely political or social context and say, well, it didn't really do this, it didn't advance, it was more of the same. It's going to be the model, including the French Revolution, model for revolutions for the next 200 plus years. It is, as the scholar Jane Kaminsky says in our film in the opening moments of our last episode, that it's about possibility. And I think that's the thing that is most interesting about the revolution. It is opening a door that will never, ever be shut again. In the first sentence of the Declaration, we say one people. It's really new, one people. We begin the next sentence with we. And that these are new concepts, and we are still trying, and in that second sentence ends with the pursuit of happiness. The key word is not happiness. We can debate, happy to talk about what it means, what I think it means, but it's the pursuit. We're a nation in the process of becoming, 11 years later at the Constitutional Convention, we say in the prologue, a more perfect union. So we have built into this sense that we are expecting to change, we're expecting to innovate, we're expecting to be better, we're expecting to be unsatisfied. And that's, I think, the key that distinguishes this, that the first time in history you have people who, and admittedly white men on the East Coast of the United States, who are new things, citizens and not subjects.
So let's talk about that reality, because that comes through very well in the documentary. We think of it as an anti-colonial uprising. But in fact, as you point out, with regard to the expansion of the American empire against other European powers, and most importantly against Native Americans, the founding fathers actually were the colonialists. George Washington, while he is trying to figure out how to free himself from the shackles of the British, is busy making land deals to confiscate land from Native Americans all the way west, as far west as he can go.
Well before the revolution, he's doing that. Many so-called, recent immigrants and people want to flood across the Appalachians and just take Indian land. I think we have to understand that if we try to see this in a binary terms, we're going to be frustrated by the American Revolution. It is a lot of different things. And it is first and foremost a revolution. It's also a bloody civil war. There are people there. It's not the tyrant 3,000 miles away imposing its tyranny on us. Us means at least 20%, 25%, in some areas much more, of people who are understandably loyalist. We have among us 20% of the population that are enslaved and free African Americans. We have Native Americans who have assimilated, who are trying to coexist within the borders of the 13 colonies. We have all of those native nations. So you get an A, I guess, in schools. We hope not anymore if you just say taxes and representation. But in point of fact, it's about Indian land. That's the biggest thing. The first big uh-oh in the relations between the British colonies in North America, the 13 and the mainland. They have 13 much more profitable colonies in the Caribbean. Profitable because Jamaica and Barbados are 90% enslaved people, and that's the engine of profit for the British.
It's all sugar.
They're making tons of money, and they're not going to end that. And their slavery is legal in all 13 of the colonies from New Hampshire to Georgia. The most profitable, if you can call it that, are Virginia and South Carolina for the obvious reasons. It's the Civil War. It's a global war because you're competing. The British have just won what we call the French and Indian War, and the rest of the world calls the 7 Years' War. And they are the most far-flung empire on earth and unable to protect its colonists. The treasury's depleted. And so they've said you can't cross the Appalachians. And that really upsets the ordinary colonist who's going over and wants to have land of their own. But it's really disturbing the Patrick Henrys and the George Washingtons and Benjamin Franklins who've been speculating, surveying and speculating, and believe they own Native American lands. The biggest way to...
Just pause on that for a second, because what you're saying is the British were in this sense anti-imperial.
No.
They were saying to the
If they had prevailed, they would have taken the whole continent, and we'd be speaking with a funny accent.
They think we do speak with a funny accent.
That's their problem. They don't understand. But the key to it, and what your question is, Fareed, is so important to understand, that it is so many different things. They did not meet in Philadelphia at the Eastern Seaboard Congress. They did not appoint George Washington the head of the Eastern Seaboard Army. They called it the Continental Congress, and they called it the Continental Army. Everyone had dreams of empire. Everybody was interested, and our revolution may be the 5th global war over the prize of North America, and prize means Indian land. They knew that California was out there, and they wanted it. And they were going to get it.
So you think the British were just temporarily...
Oh, of course,
it was a truce with the Indians. If they had won this war,
it's not a truce.
But they promised them we will not...
They're out of breath and out of money and out of men. And so they say we can't protect our own people from crossing over, so please stop. And that's the beginning. And then later on, because of that depleted treasury, they're seeking various forms of taxation to sort of balance the thing. You ought to be responsible for your own defense. We want to tax your stamps. Well, that didn't work out. Well, we want to tax your tea. Right. And we know how that works out.
So you say it's a revolution about ideas. What do you think the principal ideas are? And I want you to get to this point about the pursuit of happiness, because it is the most debated phrase in that second line. It's the one that John Locke talked about, property, not happiness. In earlier drafts, there was, the pursuit it wasn't the pursuit of property, just property, life, liberty, and property. What do you think? Tell us why you think it ended up where it did.
Well, you have to understand that at its base is this sort of disagreement between Englishmen over their rights. The colonists don't feel they have representation. They want to go into Indian land and take it. They don't understand. We don't have representatives in Parliament. How is this? But in the course of the arguments, because we're in the middle of the Enlightenment, and this is an Enlightenment that is in full bloom in Britain as well, and in Scotland, and of course the French have contributed with philosophical things. They're a repressive monarchy, quite different than the British monarchy, and so these ideas are there, and so all of a sudden these sort of arguments break into natural rights. So it's no longer, once the cat is out of the bag, when you say we hold these truths. He first said sacred and undeniable, and then he, being Jefferson, Jane Kaminsky's man, and it was changed to self-evident. And there's, in a way, if you think about it, there's nothing self-evident except this new philosophical idea that we had natural rights and the sanctity of the individual in relationship to nature and nature's God, as they would say. This is a big deal, not just politically, and I'm so sorry that the conversation always stays kind of in a narrow political or sociological and not in a spiritual dimension, particularly since we're in this magnificent setting that permits us to understand the dynamics of being awakened to the possibility of the spirit within us. So the phrase goes on, and it says life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Lots of Americans would very much prefer this to be the pursuit of objects in a marketplace of things. And what they meant was lifelong learning in a marketplace of ideas. And the key word, as I suggested, is pursuit. So what the idea is that a few phrases later, Jefferson says, all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable. Not too hard to parse. It just means that the history of the human race has been heretofore mostly about the subjugation of people, that they're accepting authoritarian rule. And they're willing to suffer the evils while they're sufferable, and they do. And that what this new thing is going to require a kind of hyper-vigilant individual who's seeking to improve themselves to make them closer to, as many of the founders, deists felt, was a disinterested God that made you different. And they weren't going to anthropomorphize it. It was the supreme architect of the universe. It's a divine providence, something like this that meant that our obligation was to actually climb towards that person. And at the same time, you had been given this gift of citizenship, which is entirely new. Adams, the great worrier, is always fretting. He says, is there too much ambition or avarice, too much lust for profit? I worry that is there enough virtue to create a republic? So the whole thing of happiness is not the pleasure-seeking happiness, but one that comes from self-improvement and making yourself more virtue. They're reaching across the Dark Ages to the classical tradition and bringing up all of these Greek ideas of perfection.
So I've always thought that, you know, they rejected, in a sense, the idea of using property in that phrase, and wanted to use. I mean, in a way, it's more about the pursuit of fulfillment or even the pursuit of virtue.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, but I think it's interesting. I spent a long time in my own thinking being distracted by, you didn't say John Locke, life, liberty, and property. These are property owners. This is at the beginning of this revolution, and it's important that we
No, they like property. It's just not the central dynamic of this revolution.
I think they're realizing that something can happen, something new. I mean, when you said it's the symbolic start of the American Revolution, they've been fighting in earnest for 15 months, 14 months while Jefferson is writing it. April 19th, 1775 at Lexington and Concord. So not everybody they still think maybe there's a way that we can convince Parliament to help us out there, see their way. And independency, as it's often called, is not on everyone's mind, certainly not in the spring of 75 on George Washington's mind. But in early 76, in January 9th, Thomas Paine, an Englishman, publishes Common Sense, the most important political tract, the most important pamphlet in American history. And he's basically just saying, he's not basically saying, he's literally saying, not since the time of Noah do we have a chance to sort of make things new, that we could create an asylum for mankind. And there's something about the corruption and the familiarity, the old religious wars, the avarice, the ambition of the old world, and this sort of, what they say is this kind of blank slate of natural possibilities here. And it's going to create an American catechism in which Emerson and Thoreau and Muir and Whitman are going to fill up with the sense of all of these things, all of the contradictions. This is Whitman, do I have contradictions? Yes, I contain multitudes. This is the idea that we are so many things, and this responsibility of the individual citizen, not just to govern themselves, to participate in a collective thing, but to understand the difference between individual and collective freedoms, what I want versus what we need, and how to also proceed in a spiritual dimension of how you have a possibility of a new relationship to whatever your God it might be.
It seems to me this point that this was kind of an ongoing process, that the most important word there is pursuit, not happiness, is very important when you think of it in these terms. We now think of the Founding Fathers as these demigods, and whatever they said, we worship. If you look at drug policy, how should we deal with marijuana? People say, what did James Madison think? And it seems that what I'm struck by is how they viewed their ideas as so malleable, in that they write the Constitution, and almost instantly they enact 10 amendments to the Constitution, which constitute now what we regard as, in some ways, the most important parts, or at least among the most important parts of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. They changed it almost, months after they wrote it.
It's not changing it. What they're doing is they're expanding it. So with the exception of Gouverneur Morris's relatively poetic preamble to the Constitution, the rest is boilerplate. Right. It's IKEA, instructions. There's not poetry here.
Yeah. It's functional.
Here's who's going to do what. It's an operating manual, and it puts Article 1 is the legislative. Right. So I think if the founders come back, they go, "Wow, you made it 250 years, and what you're yielding to the executive." That's Article 2.
I've always said biggest surprise to the Founding Fathers today would be to see the imperial presidency.
Yeah, exactly.
The president was meant to execute the laws that Congress passed.
So there's a moment in our film, and other things that we're dealing with, is that Hamilton's anxious about it. He thinks what if someone mounts the hobby horse of popularity, he says, and creates chaos? No man is above the law. They're trying to reverse engineer for an authoritarian. Jefferson, trapped in Paris, is writing to Madison saying, what if someone should lose an election but pretend false votes and reap the whirlwind?
Right. Right. Reap the whirlwind. Think
Reap
of that
the
phrase.
whirlwind, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think you're absolutely right. I think we have to see this in those malleable terms. But the Bill of Rights, I mean, what we have in the revolution, I think when we get to the first clip, it will help understand it. We've got this superficial, sanitized, kind of Madison Avenue, bloodless, gallant story of the revolution, which isn't really true. This is a horrible, bloody, you could say, as proportionally bloody as our Civil War, which we accept all the violence and the 20th century wars, but not the violence of our Civil War, of our revolution. I think in part because we think the big ideas in Philadelphia in 76 and 11 years later, the Constitutional Convention will be diminished. They're not. They're made even more impressive. So the Bill of Rights is a way of saying, we've sort of delivered this operating system, but we now need these things to say why we fought, right? And remember what the first one is. Everybody says, well, if you just ask people what the First Amendment is, they go, freedom of the press. You go, yeah, that's number 2 of a 3-part thing. Yeah. Well, it's ability to redress grievances. That's number 3. Yeah. Number 1 is that the Congress will make no establishment of a religion. We are going to liberate ourselves from the tyranny, from the drag, from the anchor that all of these established religions had placed on the states. They'd seen what was happening. And all of these things represented an attempt to add something to the Constitution that would give it the practical satisfaction for the people who did the fighting and dying, who weren't originally part of the equation. When you begin to set off this thing, this is an aristocracy. This is what we'd say was an elite. These were the people who were going to run things. The most important thing, I think, with regard to the founders, and our writer, Jeff Ward, who I've worked with for 45 years, said it really beautifully the other day. He said that if we see those founders as perfect, then they're untouchable, because we know deeply how flawed we are, and that we presume in their perfection that we can't ever equal them. So our job as artists and as storytellers is to try to remind us of the humanity. George Washington is the indispensable human being in this. But he owns 577 other human beings. As the writer Rick Atkinson said, you can't square that circle, and you cannot. He makes really lousy tactical decisions in the battlefield and loses the biggest battle in size of the revolution at Long Island, not protecting his left flank, does the same thing a few months later at Brandywine, not protecting his right flank. And he, there's problems. He runs out, he risks his life. If he's killed, the thing is over. He's the glue that holds it together, as Annette Gordon-Reed says in our film. But he picks subordinate talent, unafraid of this. Nathaniel Greene and Benedict Arnold are much better battlefield generals than he is, and he knows it, and he's okay with it. He defers to Congress. He exhibits unbelievable humility all his life.
And he keeps the country together.
He convinces somebody from New Hampshire and somebody from Georgia they're now a one thing. They're not from separate countries, and he understands this, and more than anything else, at the height of his military power, he instantly resigns his commission. And at the height of his political power, he resigns that. And George III himself, not the bumbling idiot, insane person that we like to pretend he was, but a very thoughtful constitutional monarch who's trying to do this. I mean, he's wrong about the domino theory so far, that if he loses that, he'll lose Ireland, he'll lose the Caribbean, the subcontinent, Gibraltar, etc. But he says then he is the most important character of the age. So if you can if you can have a dimensional Washington who is flawed like us, then we have access to him, and then we can, in our own ideas and in our own inspirations, in our own sense of our own possibilities, both personal and collective, tilt towards the better part of that. And that's the important thing. And I think what happens is you watch the history of the United States progress. You have people who have focused. The Declaration is not universally in everybody's mind. They're not reading it, as I've done for the last 35 years, every 4th of July to my kids and now grandkids who are going, we just want to eat, Granddaddy, we just want to eat.
You've
And I go,
the whole
no.
thing?
Well, I don't.
All the usurpations of George III?
All of the injuries and usurpations get elided. I do sometimes point out when I get some pushback from teenagers, or then I let them read Frederick Douglass's What the 4th of July Means to a Black Person. Anyway, we do this. Frederick Douglass, Lincoln, others reached back and resurrected the Declaration and Jefferson, the poetry and the meaning of this document, which we're going to celebrate, which is beyond important in all of human history. I mean, I was out on the road, and it's not in our film, but personally I said, I think the American Revolution is the most important event since the birth of Christ. And that, it's sponsored some nice things, but we go back and we look at the way we brought this document and Jefferson back and put it. So when the Gettysburg Address is happening, he's saying, and nobody says 7 years, unless you're asking your audience to sort of settle down and think about something. He's giving them the power that every rhetorician, great rhetorician does, is, here, you be the author of this too. 7 years ago. That's not the Constitutional Convention. That's not the beginning of the government in 1789. That's Thomas Jefferson and the Declaration of Independence in 76. And that means that Gettysburg Address is 2.0. We really do mean it. So your first question, yep, things continue the same, but they didn't continue the same. The second that door was opened, though it was 9 years, 13th Amendment, 144 inexcusably long years before women get to vote. But it's going to happen. And that door will never be shut, and it never works out for tyrants, no matter how pernicious and bad they are. It doesn't work out for them. And we can think of the worst example of tyranny in history, and I do not wish to in any way, with the conversation and rhetoric, belittle the 60 million lives that were extinguished in the Second World War, but they thought they had a 1,000-year Reich, and it lasted 12. It does not work out for tyrants. And it begins with us. It begins with her man.
All right. What we're going to do now is, in editing, there's a very simple phrase: show, don't tell. And
we've been telling.
And we've been telling. So what I want to do is, we talked about the role of ideas, and you give, I think, appropriate pride of place in the documentary to Tom Paine, who is actually, perhaps in many ways, the greatest rhetorician of that period. Let's watch the clip that we have of Tom Paine.
The leaders of the American Revolution need popular support. The leaders of the American Revolution are going to have to make promises that there's going to be greater social mobility, there's going to be greater respect for common people, there is going to be broader political participation in the future than there has been in the colonial past. By loosening up structures of authority, including structures of religious authority, if you're making this revolution, and you need the support of thousands of common people, men and women, what's in it for them?
Up to the 18th century, people assumed that everything will always remain the same. But the idea that you could take charge and change your culture, that's the fundamental basis of the Enlightenment, that man can be changed.
The sun never shined on a cause of greater worth. 'Tis not the affair of a city, a country, a province, or a kingdom, but of a continent. Everything that is right or natural pleads for separation. Every spot of the old world is overrun with oppression. Freedom hath been hunted round the globe. Oh, receive the fugitive, and prepare in time an asylum for mankind. We have it in our power to begin the world over again. A situation similar to the present hath not happened since the days of Noah until now. The birthday of a new world is at hand. Thomas Paine.
So now I want you to talk about how you make this just brilliant piece of cinema. why did you choose? I mean, it's the hardest thing to do, to make a movie where you have no still images, no photographs, no movies. You know, in a way, it's much easier to do stuff where you have all that, right? So you chose the snow. Like, why did you do that?
So it's so interesting. I have to sort of say, I say this often, is that you presume that building a film is additive, like building a house you're doing. And well, a house has scaffolding and false work that gets taken away when it's done. This process is subtractive. We had 400 hours of material. We knew that, yes, there are no photographs or newsreel, but this didn't necessarily represent anything more than a particularly, important opportunity to see it a new way. So I don't like reenactments, so we filmed reenactors not reenacting a particular battle, but doing what they did, for many, many years across the whole Eastern Seaboard. French uniforms, British uniforms, militia, Continental, Native American, whatever British redcoats, whatever it might be, and just watch them impressionistically and treat them almost like paintings, and then treat the live cinematography that we collected as if they're the paintings as if they're live. That man on the ice collecting wood is a painting that speaks to the sense that while we start off with an image of John Adams, who we already know in this episode is anxious about this thing and is very much committed to this aristocracy of talent, but they know that this war that has started and is getting out of hand is going to need to be fought by people like that guy collecting the
like
wood.
Zero in on the ordinary man.
So every day, I live in a tiny little village in New Hampshire, and have for 47 years, and every morning I take a walk in all seasons and times of day and weather, and that first snow shot is off my iPhone. The film we have great, very professional cameras and many, many hours of footage which is there, but the first two shots of that sequence of the Thomas Paine quote is from my camera.
To me, it's the oppression of the winter
and then
going to yield to the spring of
So these,
liberty.
first of all, this is not me. This is a collaborative effort. My co-director, Sarah Botstein, is here. The president of my network, the only place that I could have made any of the films, the 40 films that I've made, 265 hours, Paula Kruger from PBS. We don't do it without him. In this case, it's the editors seeing the metaphor or hearing within Paine's extraordinary thing. And by the way, you're right. Paine gives title to every single one of our 6 episodes because he is the working man. He is able to speak directly to Americans using biblical references that they knew, but also, he's really radical. He's gone way out ahead. He's over his skis, and he's saying, you know what? It's not Parliament. It's the king. And by the way, this whole idea of hereditary succession, it's wrong. Yeah. Nature abhors it, right? Yeah. And it's an embarrassment to the human race. And so he's taking these he's able to translate the very high principles in the Enlightenment into things that are actually make people fight in the dead of night. And remember, this is an abstract cause. You can explain why a loyalist is remaining loyalist. It's super obvious. Maybe the best form of government in a Western and European tradition would be the British constitutional monarchy at that point. All your prosperity in the land and all the things you have, your health, your literacy, is due to that. Why am I going to throw it away for something that has never been tried, and by the way, smacks of democracy, which at that time was considered the rule of the mob? There are 2 preachers after the tar and feathering of a British customs official named Malcolm who says, who do you want to be ruled by? 1 tyrant 3,000 miles away, or 3,000 tyrants not a mile away in Boston? Right. And so democracy is not the intention of the American Revolution. It is an unintended and wonderful benefit of it. And part of what we were talking about with the wonderful Bill of Rights is about saying, I need to recognize what you all have done. The ratification of the Constitution and the conversation about the need, this is not going to happen unless we get these things, are the biggest up to that point, civic conversation that has ever taken place in the world.
And in a sense, it's the sort of logical consequence of the ideas set forth. And the biggest logical consequence, of course, in the 19th century is the abolition of slavery. And in order to do it, you had to fight the bloody civil war, extraordinarily difficult. And then comes Lincoln with his second inaugural, and that's our second clip. I want people to watch this.
Inauguration Day was cold and windy, just as it had been 4 years earlier. But the U.S. Capitol was now complete, its great iron dome in place, crowned by a bronze Liberty. Just before the president began to speak, the clouds parted, flooding the stand with brilliant sunlight.
Fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray, that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. Yet if God wills that it continue until all the wealth piled up by the bondsman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid by another drawn with the sword. As was said 3,000 years ago, so still must be said, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. With malice towards none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations.
Now, again, I want to just point out...
Doesn't get any better than that. Can we just...
But I want to point... Oh, so wait. So, as a filmmaker, this is one of the most incredible speeches that Abraham Lincoln gives, and you never show Lincoln.
We
in
see
the
him
speech.
reading in the thing. Can I just say something? You jumped us ahead to slavery appropriately. Let us remember that the American Revolution, we interviewed Bernard Bailyn at 98 years old. He passed away at 101, 102. His great student was Gordon Wood, who we saw, who just passed away 3 weeks ago today in a horrible, horrible accident. It's hard to watch that. But Bailyn said that before the Civil War, slavery was not a big argument. People had made cases, he said, about the evils and had articulated. But when the revolution came and you said all men are created equal, that you had planters using the words that the British were imposing a slavery on them, the hypocrisy of it rose to the fore, and there was never a moment when the number one issue in the United States was not slavery. And George Washington knew it was wrong. Thomas Jefferson knew it was wrong. And so we have a country that is heading inexorably toward this moment, which has the fury and the righteousness of an all Old Testament God saying, you know, you want to keep this up? We will keep this up. And every drop of blood drawn by the lash will be met by one drawn by the sword. We're here to do this. He knows the war is about to end, but he's willing to do it. And then he pivots to gracious New Testament kind of with malice towards none. Those are two of the greatest sentences that I've ever come across.
Lincoln is in some ways, I think, the greatest American prose stylist of the 19th century.
And 18th and 20th and 21st. Yeah.
All right.
Because he sees us. Just like the founders always, they're fighting this impossible war with zero chance of success, but they're always talking about the millions yet unborn, as John Adams said. They're talking about you and me. And that is an amazingly poignant thing. In the middle of these long odds, they understand that this fight, this word liberty, has not just a personal application to themselves, but it has an application for all time. And this is what makes the resonance of the revolution.
I don't know if you remember the wonderful Gary Wills book about
yes,
Lincoln. And he talks about the two greatest influences on Lincoln were the Bible and Shakespeare. And you feel that in that second and order.
Do we have better,
No, I mean,
in
in some ways, I would say the 19th century at that moment is a very important one because Lincoln and Mark Twain sort of almost define a new American way of speaking and
oh, you're absolutely right. I mean, Hemingway said all American literature begins with Huck Finn. At that moment, when a black human being is a real person, when Huck decides not to turn him in, he's written up the letter that's going to say to the people who are searching for Jim where he is, and then he thinks about Jim loves his people the way we love Arn, and that, he's stayed up and calls me honey and such like things, and he looks, and he's been told, if he does this, he's going to, go to hell. Right. And so he looks at Jim and he looks at the letter, he tears up the letter, and he said, okay, then I guess I'll go to hell. Right. And this is the beginning of American literature.
It's this non-deferential, much more straightforward way of writing than the kind of fancy hoity-toity.
Who said he wrote, Lincoln and Twain wrote with the bark on. It sounded like us. And if you hear Twain on James Fenimore Cooper, who's trying desperately to sound like an English writer, it's devastating. You don't want to be James Fenimore Cooper.
Now, we want
to be something else.
We want to move to another great American artist who defined America and American music. And it just also gives you a sense of the range of Ken Burton's work. I mean, so Louis Armstrong.
On the evening of October 12, 1931, Louis Armstrong opened a 3-day run at the Hotel Driscoll in Austin, Texas. Among those who paid 75 cents to get in that night was a freshman at the University of Texas named Charlie Black. He knew nothing of jazz, had never even heard of Armstrong. He just knew there were likely to be lots of girls to dance with. Then Armstrong began to play.
He played mostly with his eyes closed, letting flow from that inner space of music things that had never before existed. He was the first genius I'd ever seen. It is impossible to overstate the significance of a 16-year-old Southern boy seeing genius for the first time in a black person. We literally never saw a black then, in any but a servant's capacity. Louis opened my eyes wide and put to me a choice. Blacks, the saying went, were all right in their place. But what was the place of such a man, and of the people from which he sprung? Charlie Black.
Charlie Black went on to become Professor Charles L. Black, a distinguished teacher of constitutional law at Yale. In 1954, he helped provide the answer to the question Louis Armstrong's music had first posed for him. He volunteered for the team of lawyers, black and white, who finally persuaded the Supreme Court in the case of Brown versus Board of Education that segregating school children on the basis of race and color was unconstitutional.
What an amazing coincidence to find, right?
So I think we are so, and the Bible says in the beginning is the Word. We are so convinced that words are the primary agency, and yet all the other art forms, when they die and go to heaven, aspire to be music. It is the only art form, as Wynton Marsalis said, that's invisible. It's the only art form you can hear two notes, and it will change things, as it did for Charlie Black. And so we can begin to broaden our notion of ideas that aren't existing in a kind of strict kind of dialectic, and are in something that actually expands our notion of what truth might be. So Louis Armstrong is the most important person in music, I didn't say jazz, in the 20th century. Sorry, Igor. He is to music. I didn't say jazz, what Einstein is to physics and what the Wright brothers are to travel. He invents, for lack of a better word, what was called, the critic Gary Giddens called modern time, playing before or after the note. And in the early days of swing music, they didn't call it that. They called it orchestrated Armstrong. Duke Ellington saw him playing in Times Square and said, I want this person on every instrument. And he spent the next 5 decades trying to assemble something. And then he took singing and revolutionized it. And if you could talk to Frank Sinatra or Ella Fitzgerald or Billie Holiday, and I did talk to Tony Bennett, they would say that it all begins with the way he sang, that all American singing, and much the way we were talking in the 19th century about Lincoln and Twain, changed. And so I think we broaden our idea of words and the power of ideas when we can begin to realize what happened to Charlie Black that day is as important as hearing, as James Fortin did, a young, free black kid, hearing the first public reading of the Declaration in Philadelphia and not thinking for a second it didn't apply to him, fighting for the patriot cause, surviving terrible prison camp, as a teenager, being wealthy in the Merchant Marines and helping William Lloyd Garrison fund his newspaper, The Abolitionist, and his granddaughter, Charlotte, went down to the Sea Islands, the first place where black people had been liberated, not emancipated, from the Confederate control, and opened schools and taught them things. The history of who we are is the history of ideas, but they're ideas born in many, many places and many kinds of circumstances. And I think if we can have a capacious and generous sense of that we can open our heart to the way in which someone like Louis Armstrong, who is a waif from the streets of New Orleans, to be able to transform our lives. I mean, if you said, Ken, who do you want to have at dinner, Abraham Lincoln or Louis Armstrong? I'd say, can I have both?
Ken Burns. Thank you all.
I looked down, and when you were going to the second...